Hello, my name is Ian Dickens, and I'm a great-great-grandson of Charles Dickens. I'm also the current president of the Dickens Fellowship, and I've been asked to provide an introduction to this short film, Dickens 150, which has been produced by a Rochester-based theatre group called Alternate Shadows. Now, Rochester, as you may or may not know, was home to Charles Dickens when he was growing up. Ordnance Terrace in Chatham was where he lived, and he returned to live in the house of his childhood dreams, Gad's Hill, in nearby Higham. Now, for many of us, the COVID-19 pandemic meant 2020 was a traumatic year. For amateur dramatic societies that perform for local communities and charities, it had its own particular challenges, not least no plays, no pantomimes, no audiences, and not even any rehearsals. So what were they to do? Well, it just so happened that 2020 was also the 150th anniversary of Charles Dickens' death, and Medway Council had numerous events planned to celebrate his life and works. Alternate Shadows were to be involved in quite a few, but because of national and local lockdowns, they all had been cancelled. Not to be thwarted by a mere pandemic, they decided the show must go on. However, was there anything they could do that adhered to COVID-19 health and safety regulations? Well, Richard Harding, the group's founder, put his best thinking cap on and pondered a lot. What if they could make a film using COVID-secure household groups, keeping social distance, wearing masks, and using mainly outside locations? Could it be done? Well, in true Dickensian hero fashion, he set forth to put his dreams into reality. Firstly, of course, he needed a script, and it just so happened that author Ben Henderson, who had written the group's previous year's award-winning play, was free and jumped at the chance. It had to be short and concise. The film was only to be 40 to 45 minutes, so the script took on the form of a series of vignettes that reveals how the fictional characters in Dickens's novels reflected very real people from his life. With the script in the bag, the hard work of organising the filming started. Venues had to be chosen and then scoped out. Filming would have to be mainly outside, which would prove problematic enough in itself with weather, road traffic and passers-by. The venues still had to be accessed, and the owners and or managers went around to open up. Also, of course, was the small matter of adhering to all the ever-changing safety procedures and COVID-19 rules and regulations. Kerry Thompson from the Medway Little Theatre was, as ever, totally on top of the situation. All involved had a COVID procedure form to read and sign, and this, along with the usual risk assessment forms and health and safety rules, added to the mountain of paperwork and administration headaches. However, armed with masks, thermometers, clipboards, full of contacts, times and temperatures, and a seemingly endless amount of calm efficiency, Kerry's stage-managed actors and technicians with consummate ease. Now, all the scenes were cleverly written to have only two main characters at any one time, social distanced, of course. To provide authentic atmosphere, several local groups and societies, mainly the Dickens Fellowship in Rochester and Broadstairs, were engaged, and I know that many members of the Fellowship don't need much encouragement when it comes to dressing up. And as they owned and wore their own wonderful costumes and were in the background, it made health and safety procedures a lot easier to implement. And it gave the scenes a superb sense of time and place. There were young actors from the Medway Little Theatre youth group, along with the older generation, one of whom was 91. And I know it was wonderful to see a wide range of people of all ages helping out and mucking in with gleeful enthusiasm and a genuine sense of togetherness. Actors, technicians, extras, and administrators all had to be rounded up and organised into bubbles and teams of 6, with many people taking on multiple duties and roles. Masked Dickensian characters wielding sound booms must have seemed a strange sight indeed to those in Rochester High Street and the cathedral grounds. I'm reliably informed that all those involved responded magnificently, and with their usual energy, enthusiasm, and tremendous sense of fun, the stress of COVID-secure filming was thoroughly banished to the sidelines. I'm sure you will agree with me when you watch the film that it was well worth the effort, and everyone involved rose to the challenge admirably. Something that makes this project even more special is that everyone involved were volunteers. It was done for people, not for profit, a sentiment my great-great-grandfather would have approved of, I am sure. Now sit back and enjoy. Thank you.
Read all about it in Strand.
Mr. John Forster for you, sir.
My dear Mr. Foster, good afternoon. Do come in, please. Take a seat.
Good afternoon to you, Mr. Chapman.
Thank you. May I get you refreshment, tea?
Thank you, no. I have come directly from my club.
Now, you have a business proposition for me, I believe, and I'm very keen to hear it. Though, before we go any further, please accept my sincere condolences for the loss of your client and friend, Mr. Dickens.
Thank you, yes. A tragic and unexpected loss.
Yes, the nation mourns with you, Mr. Foster. The entire nation mourns with you.
There is some consolation in a loss so widely shared.
I read in the Times that you attended the service.
I had that honour.
And Rochester Cathedral was not ultimately favoured?
A brick-lined grave had been prepared there. Such was his wish. The nation wished otherwise.
Yes. We should not allow the man's modesty deflect the appreciation and approbation of the entire nation, should we?
Quite so. It was, however, a simple service. Family and a few close friends.
His simple service in Poets' Corner, it's an oxymoron.
And yet, this is the truth of it. A simple service as he was laid to rest, with Sheridan at his feet. His new neighbours, David Garrick and Samuel Johnson. A fitter resting place it would be difficult to find for one possessing a genius that had much in common with the striking characteristics of many with which his dust now mingles.
The man rests where he belongs, Mr. Foster.
Facing the grave, and on his left and right, are the monuments of Chaucer, Shakespeare and Dryden. The three immortals who did most to create and settle the language, and to which he gives now another undying name.
Very well put. So, you have a proposition for me?
I do. An important proposition. A biography of Charles Dickens.
It must be written. I'm sure you have much material.
I have more than that. I have the consent and cooperation of Mr. Dickens himself.
Capital! The gentleman's story must be told.
And I shall tell it. But in truth, Charles was not born a gentleman.
Was he not?
I think it was some embarrassment to him.
It's hard to imagine a man whose achievements should displace his embarrassment more than Mr. Dickens.
Quite so, but if we do not reveal his entirely humble origins, we do not reveal the man.
Humble, you say?
Humble, yes, but not as in his mischievous, cloying character, Uriah Heep.
When I was quite a young boy, I got to know what humbleness did, and I took to it. I'm very humble at the moment, Mr. Copperfield. But I have a little power.
I mean genuinely humble. Charles John Huffam Dickens was born on the 7th of February 1812 in Portsmouth. Born to John and Elizabeth Dickens, his father was a pay clerk in the Navy Office. Such employment took him from Portsmouth to London, Sheerness,
and to Chatham Dockyard. We went where my father was posted. This, of course, was when I was an infant. I have many happy early memories of Chatham, of Rochester, and of the surrounding Kent countryside. I was the second of 8 children.
Your father had to provide for a large family.
On a very modest income. However, I would say that my childhood at the time was idyllic. As idyllic as could be expected for the second child of a pay clerk in the Navy Office, that is. Although I would not describe myself as an over-cared for boy, I was left to my own devices. I was afforded some education. And how I read. I read voraciously. The novels of Tobias Smollett, Henry Fielding. I read and reread The Arabian Nights.
Some education, you say?
Yes. It was interrupted by events which I would say made such a mark upon me, they changed me irrevocably.
It sounds as if you're laying the grounds for a journey into one of your fictions, Charles.
Would that it were so. What I tell you now is grounded in the facts, although a pitiful fiction it would make. My father's employers summoned him to work again in London. We lived in Camden. A growing family, coupled with my father's growing imprudence, resulted in him accruing debts. Finally, a debt of some £40 to a baker led to his imprisonment in Marshalsea Debtors' Prison. At the age of 12 years, I found myself working for 10 hours a day at a factory, Warren's bootblacking factory on Hungerford Stairs. My education was over. But I learnt humiliation. I learnt despair. I learnt loneliness. These are lessons that I would want for no child.
Charles, I'm sorry. Do you wish to continue?
Even after all these years, those torments burn within me still.
It is ingrained within your soul, my dear Charles. I mean, how could it be otherwise? It explains much. It is ingrained within your work, your attention to the plight of working children, to the poor.
It set a fire within me. If ever that misery were to end, if ever I were to find my chances in life, I swore never to find myself upon such circumstances again.
So much becomes so instantly clear. Your father, describe him to me.
Annual income, £20. Annual expenditure, 19 shillings and 6 pence. Result, happiness. Annual income, £20. Annual expenditure, £20 and 6. Result, misery. Welcome poverty. Welcome houselessness. Welcome hunger, rags, tempest and beggary. I would describe him thus: a jovial opportunist with no money sense. His character and trait may have found expression in my writing. I would not state it as so, but others may find him there.
You were an impoverished child, away from the love of family, forced to live on your own wits, to provide for your family and earn your own keep.
Oh, you little bleeder!
Don't tell me you're going to send me away, sir, pray. Don't turn me out of doors to wander the streets again. Please, sir, I want some more.
I was 12. I was hungry. I was desperate. We had the audacity to call ourselves a civilised society.
Tell me of your working conditions.
The Blacking Warehouse was the last house on the left-hand side of the way at Old Hungerford Stairs. It was a crazy, tumble-down old house, abutting, of course, on the river, and literally overrun with rats. Its wainscoted rooms and its rotten floors and staircase, and the old grey rats swarming down in the cellars, and the sound of their squeaking and scuffling coming up the stairs at all times, and the dirt and decay of the place rise up visibly before me as if I were there again. The counting house was on the first floor, looking over the coal barges and the river. There was a recess in it, in which I was to sit and work. My work was to cover the pots of paste blacking, first with a piece of oil paper, and then with a piece of blue paper, to tie them round with a string, and then to clip the paper close and neat all round, until it looked as smart as a pot of ointment from an apothecary's shop. When a certain number of grosses of pots had attained this picture perfection, I was to paste on each a printed label, and then go on again with more pots. 2 or 3 other boys were kept at similar duty downstairs on similar wages. One of them came up in a ragged apron and a paper cap on the first Monday morning to show me the trick of using the string and tying the knot. His name was Bob Fagin.
Fagin, I see.
A 40-minute walk from the lodgings I shared in Camden, a day's labour, and then a 40-minute walk back to the lodgings I shared with strangers. I was a literate boy. I aspired to be an educated man, a gentleman. All hope had gone.
And the next chapter, Charles. I must have it now. How did these calamitous events in your family's fortunes change?
It was death that saved us.
Death, Charles?
Yes, death. The death of my grandmother Elizabeth. It was a £450 inheritance from her estate that saved my father from the Marshalsea and saved us all.
What would you tell me of your mother?
When my father was released from the Marshalsea and his debts, for that time at least, were settled, I was left to work in that factory for another 10 months. Do you believe that?
Why, Charles, why?
Because my mother thought it best. It was another 6 shillings a week, after all.
Your own mother left you in those conditions.
I have sometimes portrayed mothers as not the paragons of virtue, of the selfless adoration of their children that might be expected.
Indeed. I think of the absent-minded, garrulous Mrs. Catherine Nickleby, who continued to put on airs in spite of the reduced circumstance of her family. Blind to the dangers that the children confronted, she was a comedic character in her pretensions.
The call must originate with me, my dear. That is indispensable. The fact is that it's necessary that I should show a sort of condescension on part, and that I should show this young person that I am willing to take notice of her. There is a very respectable-looking young man that is a conductor to one of the omnibuses that goes by here. Your sister and I have noticed him very often. He has a wart upon his nose, you know, exactly like a gentleman's servant.
Have all the gentlemen's servants got water upon their noses, Mother?
Nicholas, how very absurd you are. Of course, I mean his glazed hat, and not the wart upon his nose. Though even that's not as ridiculous as it may seem. For we had a footboy once who not only had a wart, but a wen also. A very large wen, too. He demanded to have his wages risen in consequence, because he found it became very expensive. Let me see. Now, the best way that I can think of would be to send my card with my compliments. No doubt that they'd take him for a potter porter by this young man to the Saracen with two necks. If the waiter took him for a gentleman's servant, then so much the better. Then all Mrs. Brodie would have to do is send her card back by carrier. He could easily come with a double knock, and there would be an end to the matter.
My dear Mother, I don't suppose such unsophisticated people such as these ever had a card of their own. Or ever will have.
Oh, that indeed, Nicholas, my dear. And that's another thing. If you're going to put it upon that grounds, why, of course, I have no more to say, other than I doubt that they are very good sort of persons. And I have no objection to them coming to tea if they like. I shall make a point of being very civil to them if they do.
A garrulous woman whose loose talk meanders in a desultory manner, and she clings to her illusory gentility despite her bleak surroundings, for she never had the knack of recognising reality.
Is this Catherine Nickleby of whom we speak?
Of course.
As we speak of bleak, then I think of the neglectful Mrs. Jellyby in Bleak House, a woman who showed such care for the poor in Africa that she neglected her own family, her own children.
It is gratifying. It involves the devotion of all my energies, such as they are. But that is nothing, so it succeeds. And I am more confident of success every day. Do you know, Mrs. Summerson, I almost wonder that you never turned your thoughts to Africa.
A telescopic philanthropist, a woman devoted to distant troubles while entirely neglectful of her families.
Yes, I think of the ice-cold Mrs. Clenham in Little Dorrit.
Let me never feel while I am alive that I die before his face and utterly perish away from him, like one consumed by lightning or swallowed in an earthquake.
It was my father who insisted that I be taken away from that hell. It was he who allowed me to complete 2 more years of education, and thank God for it.
You have made it patently clear in your works the importance of education to you.
Having been deprived of so much formal education myself, having seen the vacuum of opportunity for the children of the poor working class, it should be more than important to me, it should be paramount to everyone.
Things have improved, Charles.
They've not improved enough. Children are our most precious resource. They've been treated abysmally. I saw with my own eyes those frightful institutions that call themselves orphan schools. They were a reflection of a society where widowed women had no right to own property, had no chance of gainful, fair employment, were forced to deposit their children should they wish to remarry.
Yes, you embodied such appalling institutions in To the Boys' Hall and that monster, Wackford Squeers.
Institutions run solely for the profit of the likes of Squeers, where boys were beaten, taught nothing, and virtually starved.
If any boy speaks without leave, I'll take the skin off his back!
God save us from the utilitarians who would have our children solely invested in facts and figures, with no scope or allowance for their own imaginations. I would have this damned.
Gradgrind.
Such as the likes of Thomas Gradgrind, yes.
Suppose you were to carpet a room. Would you use carpet with representations of flowers upon it?
You please, sir, I am very fond of flowers.
And that's why you would put tables and chairs and have people walking upon it in their heavy boots?
It wouldn't hurt them, sir. They wouldn't crash or wither, if you please, sir. They would be a picture of what was very pretty and pleasant. And I would fancy...
Aye. But that's it, you must not fancy. You must never fancy. You must not, Cecilia Jupe, do anything of the kind. Fact.
Those 2 additional years of education allowed me the next chapter of my life, brief as it was.
Do tell of it.
At 15, I was taken on as a law clerk. At the offices of Tweedy and Prideaux, I was delivering documents, running errands, and keeping petty cash. For 3 years, I was surrounded by law students, law clerks, magistrates, barristers, and solicitors.
This time made a lasting impression of you. You've written of lawyers in 11 of 15 of your novels.
I have found them interesting.
Interesting. But you hardly write of them favourably. You so often describe them as dishonest or socially awkward. I think of how you describe the lawyer, Mr. Vowles, in Bleak House. Mr. Vowles admits he's never been welcomed in anyone's home. Were he to partake of solid food in company, he wouldn't know what the consequences would be.
I saw for myself what a sham the law can be. Cases that are dragged for lifetimes through the courts of Chancery. Decade after decade, with no resolution. To the point where there are no funds left in the estate. They all being soaked up in legal fees. What madness is this?
Ah, the case of Jarndyce and Jarndyce in Bleak House.
It would be funny if it were not true.
Rarely, if ever, do you give lawyers any redeeming qualities. I think of Quilp's corrupt attorney in the old curiosity shop. He would affect feelings for his clients, whom he would then cheat.
Ah, yes. Samson Brass. A man who could boast he was a gentleman by Act of Parliament.
I maintain the title by the annual payment of £12 sterling for a certificate. I'm not one of those writers of books or painters of pictures who assumes a station that the laws of their country doesn't recognise. If any man wants to bring an action against me, he must describe me as a gentleman, or his action is null and void.
And later, when my work was plagiarised both here and in America, I sought redress in the courts. The case was found in my favour, and yet it was I who bore the costs. Plainly the victim of the matter, and yet it was I who was financially punished. You wonder that I should satirise the law and lawyers. The law is simply an institution that makes business for itself.
What next?
I was stifled and bored as a law clerk. However, during that time I learnt the Gurney method of shorthand writing. An endeavour that takes most 3 years, I mastered in as many months. From there I became a court reporter, then a parliamentary reporter. From writing reports, I advanced to writing journalistic pieces. At that point, my circle changed, and changed dramatically. I was acquainted with publishers. My first short story, A Dinner at Poplar Walk, being published in 1833. My work then being serialised in the monthly publications of the time.
And the rest, as is said, is history.
The history of a humble writer.
Humble, Charles?
Well, that's for others to say. I continued to write articles and to edit magazines and periodicals for quite some time, as you know. But by and by, there was on a growing basis interest in my novels, which were at first serialised in magazines.
Growing interest and growing financial reward.
Undeniably. They have made me comfortable. Very comfortable. Why, this very house is built upon my novels.
Tell me of your home here at Gad's Hill Place in Higham.
Yes, this old house. Well, when I first clapped eyes on it, I was but 9 years old. I walked by here on many occasions with my father. I remember as if it was yesterday. He said, "Work hard, and one day you shall own this house, or just such a house." I returned many times to look upon it, to see an image of my possible future. Fate.
Fate manipulated by the hands of hard work, surely.
We have lived in many homes, John. But I am at my happiest here in Higham, near Rochester. I feel as if I have come home.
You have had your favourite times here.
And my favourite time is Christmas. For it is a good, kind, charitable, pleasant time. The only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem of one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely.
Good King Wenceslas looked out on the feast of Stephen, when the snow lay round about, deep and crisp and even. Brightly shone the moon that night, though the frost was cruel, when a poor man came...
Every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart.
The season of goodwill to all men, Charles.
The season of goodwill to all men.
And this notion particularly applies to employees and their employers?
You'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose.
If quite convenient, sir.
It is not convenient, and it is not fair. If I were to stop a half-crown for it, you think yourself ill-used, I'll be bound. And yet, you don't think I'm ill-used, paying a day's wages for no work?
If you please, sir, it's only once a year.
A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier the next morning.
Should there not be a time of year we reserve for these sentiments?
A time of good spirits?
Yes, good spirits. Spirits of one type and another.
How now? What do you want with me?
Much.
Who are you?
In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley. You don't believe in me.
I don't.
Why do you doubt your own senses?
Because a little thing affects them. Slight disorder of the stomach. Make them eat. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of underdone potato. There's more of gravy than grave about you, whoever you are.
Mercy! Do you believe in me or not?
I do. I must. But why do spirits walk the earth? And why do they come to me?
It is required of every man that the spirit within him should walk abroad with fellow men and travel far and wide. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death.
You are fettered.
I wear the chain I forged in life. I made it link by link, yard by yard, and girded it with my own free will. And with free will of my own, I wore it. Is the pattern strange to you? Or would you know the weight and the length of the strong coil that you bear yourself? It was as full, as heavy, and as long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. You have laboured on it since. It is a ponderous chain.
Oh, Jacob Marley, tell me more. Be comfort to me, Jacob.
I have none to give.
A time of comfort. A time of giving.
The birth of Christ, the Son of God, the Redeemer.
Who does not enjoy a good story, John? Who doesn't enjoy a story of redemption?
Hello? What do you mean, coming here at this time of day?
I'm sorry, sir. I'm behind my time.
You are? Yes, I think you are. Step this way, sir, if you please.
It's only once a year, sir. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir.
And now, I'll tell you what, my friend. I'm not going to stand for this any longer. And therefore, I'm about to raise your salary. A Merry Christmas, Bob. Merrier Christmas than I've given you in many a year. I'll raise your salary and I'll endeavour to help your struggling family. We'll discuss your affairs this very afternoon.
I'm quite sure you've heard enough of my affairs for one day. It's Christmas Eve. You need to get home to your family. You've a train to catch.
Yes, I do. Will you be docking me £0.50 from my wages?
I'm quite beyond redemption, my dear John. I think that story has pleased people. Do you think it will go on pleasing?
My dear Charles, I'm certain of it. A Christmas Carol. I'm certain that through it and by it, you will be known as the man who invented Christmas.
The man who invented Christmas? My goodness me. To think any mortal man could deserve such an accolade. No, I would want to be known as a man who appreciated Christmas. A man who lived through times when Christmas was appreciated and loved by everyone with a heart in their breast.
Is that how you want to be remembered?
I want no elaborate funeral, nor any memorial raised to me. And should they stand the test of time, I want only to
be remembered through those works that have been published in my name. That is an outline of what he said.
You will, of course, tell me what you will accept as an advance.
I shall. Good day to you, sir.
And good day to you too, Mr. Forster.
John Forster wrote a substantial biography of his friend, a work still referred to today by scholars. Charles Dickens drew attention to many social injustices in the Victorian era. He even lectured the Americans on the evils of slavery. His work has never been out of print, nor is it ever likely to be. Walter Bagehot, a journalist and writer for the era, described Dickens as a special correspondent for posterity. But perhaps a more touching tribute came from the lips of a young daughter of a costermonger in 1870, who on hearing of his passing was heard to exclaim, "Mr. Dickens dead? Then will Father Christmas die too?" She needn't have worried. Perhaps the last words should come from that one character who never fails to touch us with his single expression of hope.
God bless us, everyone.